The air smelled like old dust and cold metal, even in May. Ethan Miller knew that smell better than he knew the smell of clean laundry or hot food. It was the smell of the fourth-floor hallway in the Carver Street apartments, built cheap in 1978 and never maintained since. His lungs hurt most mornings, not from sickness, but from the simple effort of dragging in the thin, recycled air. He was 13, looked maybe 10, too quiet. Skin stretched tight over bones that hadn't gotten enough to work with. He had mastered the art of being invisible in a crowd, which was the only reliable survival skill he'd learned so far. The real problem with being invisible, though, is that when someone does see you, they usually see you as an object, not a person. Something to be moved, or worse, something to be broken. It happened in the cafeteria, exactly 12:47 p.m. Lunch was a piece of dry chicken and some gray-looking peas, which Ethan was planning to save half of for dinner. He kept his head down, focusing on the peeling formica of the table, trying to make the noises of the 100 other kids yelling and scraping chairs dissolve into white noise. Kyle Jennings, a 6th grader who'd hit puberty early and thought he was a goddamn Viking, slammed his tray down next to Ethan. Kyle wasn't a malicious genius. He was just bored, heavy, and loud. "What's up, Miller?" Kyle's voice was a low rumble that always felt like it was coming from his chest, not his throat. Ethan didn't look up. "Nothing. You know, your shirt is kind of dirty. Is that gravy or something else?" Kyle reached out a thick finger and rubbed the faded blue cotton near Ethan's shoulder. It wasn't gravy. It was a smear of old motor oil from when he'd been dragged through the alley behind the convenience store the week before. Ethan tightened his grip on the plastic fork. He felt the heat rising up his neck, that familiar shame. He could usually handle the verbal stuff. He could take the shoves in the stairwell. But he hated the contact, hated being touched by Kyle. "Leave it alone, Kyle." The voice came out thin, a weak sound, like the last breath of a dying animal. Kyle laughed, a wet, rattling sound. He picked up Ethan's half-eaten chicken piece. "Oh, look, a snack for later." He paused, looking at the chicken, then dropped it onto the floor, grinding it into the linoleum with his sneaker. It was just chicken. It was school food. It was nothing. But Ethan felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. That was his dinner, planned out. "Hey, that was mine," Ethan whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "It is now trash," Kyle declared, kicking the tray slightly. "You got anything else, Miller? I'm still hungry." Ethan pushed his worn gray backpack further under the table, instinctively protecting the only thing that mattered inside, the notebook. It wasn't a journal. It was a spiral-bound book filled with intricate, tiny drawings of city architecture. Buildings that didn't exist, bridges that flew impossibly high, complex, silent cities built on top of old ruins. It was his escape route. Kyle's eyes, dull and flat, tracked the movement. He didn't see the drawings. He just saw the nervous gesture. "What's in the bag? Secret money?" Kyle snatched the backpack off the floor before Ethan could react. "Give it back!" Ethan finally raised his voice, and the sound was so sharp and desperate that a few nearby kids actually glanced over. Kyle held the bag high, his biceps straining against the too-tight t-shirt. He shook it, and the notebook slid out, hitting the floor with a pathetic thud. The cover was already bent. Ethan scrambled to grab it, but Kyle put his foot down, not on Ethan, but precisely on the center of the notebook. "A diary? You writing poems, Miller?" Kyle's friend started snickering, a wave of cruel, meaningless sound. Ethan didn't plead. He just stared at the ruined book beneath the oversized sneaker. His hands were shaking. He wasn't thinking about fighting Kyle. He was thinking about the bridge he'd been designing last night, the one that spanned a theoretical river in a clean, quiet place. It was flattened now. The spine was broken. Kyle lifted his foot, bored with the whole thing. The damage was done. He dropped the backpack and walked away, his friends trailing him, laughing. Ethan picked up the notebook. The cover was split. A few pages were stained with the oil from Kyle's shoe. He didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the structural damage. It wasn't the bullying that defined this moment. It was the realization that he had no defense. None. His physical size, His weak voice, his total lack of resources, it all meant that the people who wanted to stamp out something beautiful in the world always had the advantage. He waited until the bell rang. Then he walked out into the cold Dayton afternoon, clutching the broken book like a casualty. The Carver Street apartments were owned by Meridian Holdings, a company that existed only on paper in Tallahassee, Florida. Meridian collected the rent, ignored the repair requests, and periodically sent a grim-faced man named Mr. Henderson to chase down late payments. Henderson was a landlord's mercenary, a guy who knew how to look sad while delivering an eviction notice. Ethan lived with his grandmother, Mary. Mary Miller was 65, working 2 shifts cleaning hospital rooms to keep the gas meter running. She was tired all the time, her hands permanently swollen from the industrial bleach and the constant scrubbing. She loved Ethan fiercely, but her love was a quiet, exhausting force, mostly directed at ensuring he didn't starve or freeze. She didn't have the bandwidth for emotional architecture or defending him from Kyle Jennings. That night, the heat was off again. Ethan was wrapped in 3 blankets on the pull-out couch in the living room, trying to re-tape the spine of his notebook with clear packing tape he'd found in the junk drawer. His grandmother came in late, smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee grounds. She sank onto the armchair, the springs protesting loudly. "Did you eat, honey?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Yeah, made toast," Ethan lied. He'd eaten the single stale Pop-Tart he'd hidden in his jacket pocket. She nodded, too tired to press the issue. She peeled off her gloves, revealing the raw, red skin beneath. "Mr. Henderson was here today," she said slowly. Ethan stiffened. Henderson meant trouble. He said the rent check bounced again, said he needs the cash by Friday, or, you know. She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew, or they were out on the street. "Didn't you mail it last week?" Ethan asked. "I did." He said the account was empty. "Maybe I miscalculated the hours this week." "I don't know, Ethan. I just don't know where the money goes." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "The washing machine down the hall is backed up again, too. Henderson says it's tenant negligence. Says he'll charge us $50 to unclog it." $50, that was a week of groceries. Ethan looked at his hands. Small hands. Useless hands, really. They could draw beautiful buildings, but they couldn't fix a broken pipe, and they certainly couldn't conjure $50. He thought about Kyle Jennings grinding the chicken into the floor, and he thought about Meridian Holdings charging his grandmother $50 for a communal plumbing failure. It was the same mechanism. The powerful taking something small and vital from the powerless, just because they could. He realized the problem wasn't the chicken, or the $50, or even Kyle. The problem was the system that allowed Kyle and Henderson and Meridian Holdings to operate unchallenged. The system that designed the apartment building to rot slowly, maximizing profit while minimizing human comfort. He had always channeled his pain into the drawings. He'd built silent, perfect worlds in response to the loud, ugly one outside. But tonight the drawings felt flimsy. Tape wouldn't fix the spine. Escapism wouldn't pay the rent. He needed a real move, something that wasn't architecture, something that was damage. Ethan got up quietly, padding across the cold floor into the kitchen. He found a piece of paper, a clean sheet from a notepad, and a pencil. He didn't draw a bridge or a tower. He started writing a list. Not a list of things he needed, but a list of things that were broken. 1. The water heater, 3 months broken. 2. The leak in the ceiling above the stove, bucket collected 1 gallon last night. 3. The lock on the front door, only catches sometimes. 4. The washing machine drain fee, $50. 5. The radiator in the 3rd floor apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez is running her oven for heat. It felt stupid. A list. What was a list against an international holding company? He went back to his couch. He pulled his grandmother's old, gigantic, outdated laptop, the one that took 5 minutes to boot up and sounded like a jet engine when it ran a search, onto his lap. He typed 2 words into the search bar: Meridian Holdings, Tallahassee. The results were useless. Corporate registrations, tax IDs, names of shell company presidents he couldn't pronounce. It was a digital fortress built out of bureaucracy. He tried again, refining the search, adding location. Meridian Holdings, Carver Street, Dayton reviews. More useless junk. A few one-star reviews from tenants complaining about mold, but nothing actionable. No phone numbers that weren't automated lines. No human being to scream at. He spent the next 3 days like this. School was a blur. He ate only the food provided, ignoring Kyle, who seemed disappointed that Ethan wasn't reacting anymore. He was focused. He was looking for the weak point in the structure. Every building, even a bureaucratic one, has a keystone. On Thursday afternoon, the day before Mr. Henderson was due back, Ethan found a mention on a local Dayton news blog, buried 6 pages deep in a search about local property tax evasion. The article was from 2 years ago, reporting on a zoning dispute. Meridian Holdings was trying to get a tax abatement for the Carver Street building, claiming that they were undertaking significant structural renovations. The article quoted the zoning board meeting minutes, and buried in those minutes was the name of the man who had physically signed the renovation affidavit. Not the shell company president, not the Tallahassee office, a local guy. A name that existed in Dayton, Ohio. Kenneth R. Vance, property manager, Meridian Holdings. Vance, not Henderson. Henderson was the muscle. Vance was the brain, the guy who actually filed the paperwork and signed the lies. Ethan typed the name into Google. Kenneth R. Vance. The first result wasn't a corporate file. It was a Facebook profile, a public one. Ethan stared at the screen. Kenneth R. Vance, 50-something, heavy-set, wearing a bright red polo shirt and standing next to a gleaming, ridiculously expensive black truck. The profile picture was taken at a golf course, Oakwood Country Club. The sheer, sickening normalcy of it hit him harder than Kyle's foot ever could. Vance was signing off on mold-infested apartments, charging $50 for broken communal services, and then spending his weekends relaxing at a private club, driving a vehicle worth more than his grandmother earned in 3 years. Ethan scrolled through the profile. Photos of Vance fishing, photos of Vance at a college football game, drinking beer, photos of Vance with his kids, 2 teenagers smiling brightly. He saw the weak point. It wasn't financial, it was personal. He clicked on the location tag of the golf course photo. Oakwood Country Club, 4700 Sycamore Lane, Dayton, OS. He looked up the address on Google Maps. It was 15 miles away in the clean, silent part of Dayton, the part that didn't smell like old metal. He shut the laptop, the machine sighing loudly. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the broken notebook. He looked at the precise tiny lines he'd drawn, the perfect theoretical world. He looked at the tape holding the cover together. He needed to stop drawing the perfect world and start destroying the ugly one, or at least making a scratch in it. He thought of his weak voice in the cafeteria. He needed to find a way to project that voice, not with sound, but with action. The next morning, Friday, Ethan told his grandmother he was going to the library after school to work on a big history project. He looked grateful for the quiet. He had $2.37, all in change. He took the bus route that went south away from Carver Street toward the suburbs. The bus ride took 40 minutes, the landscape shifting slowly from cracked pavement and barred windows to manicured lawns and trees that looked like they were actually cared for. He got off 4 blocks from Sycamore Lane. He walked the rest of the way, feeling acutely aware of the dust on his shoes against the perfect, bright green grass. Oakwood Country Club was exactly what he expected. High stone wall, thick iron gate, a small security booth. A sign warned that trespassers would be prosecuted. He couldn't go in. That wasn't the plan. He circled the perimeter until he found a spot where the landscaping crew had left a gap in the hedge, allowing a clear view of the parking lot and the back entrance of the clubhouse. He waited. Time was irrelevant. The humiliation he felt in the cafeteria, the cold in his grandmother's apartment, that was the fuel. Around 4:30 p.m., the black truck from the Facebook photo pulled into the lot. Kenneth R. Vance got out, wearing the same loud golf shirt, carrying a huge leather bag full of clubs. He looked relaxed, untouchable. Vance walked into the clubhouse. Ethan pulled out his pencil and a clean sheet of paper. He had spent the previous night not drawing perfect cities, but practicing one specific thing, his handwriting, making it look as official and adult as possible. He wrote 3 short paragraphs. He didn't use threatening language. He used the language of bureaucracy and documentation. He listed the facts, the broken things. He waited another hour. Vance finally came back out, talking on a cell phone, laughing about something. He tossed his golf bag into the truck and walked toward the driver's door. Ethan took a deep breath. His hands weren't shaking now. They were steady. This was the weak voice, amplified. He walked quickly, silently, crossing the street and slipping through the gap in the hedge. He moved like a ghost, practiced in urban navigation. He reached the black truck just as Vance opened the driver's side door. Vance saw him. For a moment, the laughter died in his throat. He saw a skinny, dirty kid standing next to his luxury vehicle, holding a piece of paper. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get away from the truck," Vance yelled, dropping his phone. The noise drew the attention of a valet parking attendant nearby. Ethan had maybe 3 seconds. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He moved. With one swift motion, Ethan took the paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the small open gap between the window glass and the rubber gasket of the driver's side door, right where the window motor would catch it. Then he ran. He didn't look back. He sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn, back toward the gap in the hedge. Vance was shouting, stumbling around the hood of the truck, trying to chase him, but the man was slow, heavy, and already winded. Ethan scrambled back through the hedge and disappeared into the suburban landscape. He took the bus home, his heart still hammering against his ribs. He felt a tremor running through his arms and legs. Not fear, but pure cold adrenaline. He hadn't fought Kyle. He hadn't fixed the plumbing. He hadn't paid the rent. He had delivered a message, a very specific message. He got back to the Carver Street apartment just after 7. His grandmother was microwaving a dinner roll. "You're late, Ethan. Did you finish your project?" "Almost," he said, collapsing onto the couch. "Good. Mr. Henderson came by again. He said he'll be back Monday morning. The money has to be there." Ethan nodded. He knew. He didn't tell her about the bus ride or the golf course. He just sat there, waiting for Monday. His message was delivered, but he had no idea if it landed or if it would be swept away like the chicken on the cafeteria floor. Monday morning, 9:15 a.m. Ethan was supposed to be in first period history. Instead, he was hidden in the dusty stairwell of the Carver Street building, listening. At 9:22 a.m., a heavy-set man in a suit, not Mr. Henderson, knocked on the door of apartment 4B. That was Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment where the radiator was broken. Ethan heard the murmur of voices, then the sound of heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. At 9:30 a.m., Mr. Henderson arrived looking angry and stressed, carrying the eviction papers. He walked straight to Mary Miller's door, apartment 4C. He raised his fist to knock, but before his knuckles could hit the wood, the door to apartment 4B, Mrs. Rodriguez's place, opened. It wasn't Mrs. Rodriguez. It was Kenneth R. Vance, the property manager. Vance looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes dark. He was dressed in a crumpled business suit, not a golf shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept. He saw Henderson standing by Ethan's grandmother's door. "Henderson, what the hell are you doing?" Vance's voice was a harsh whisper, filled with panic. Henderson looked surprised. "I'm serving 4C. They're past deadline." Vance grabbed Henderson's arm, pulling him violently down the hallway, away from the door. "No, you are not serving 4C. You are not serving anyone. Get those papers out of here." "What?" "Vance, they owe 3 weeks. Meridian needs the space cleared," Henderson protested, confused. Vance pushed him against the wall, hard enough to make the old plaster dust down. "We are fixing the goddamn problems, Henderson. We are not evicting anyone. Do you hear me? You're going to the hardware store, and you are buying 5 gallons of primer, new spackle, and a high-efficiency water heater. Now." Henderson looked completely lost. "A new water heater? Vance, that's $2,500. The corporate directive is to—" "I don't care about the corporate directive. I care about the liability," Vance hissed. "Just do it. And call the third-floor woman. Tell her the radiator repair is scheduled for this afternoon. Tell her we'll comp her utilities for 2 months for the inconvenience. And get out of here." Henderson beaten and confused, retreated down the stairs. Vance stood in the hallway for a moment, rubbing the bridge of his nose, his eyes darting around the hallway. He looked up at the ceiling, then down at the floor, as if expecting the entire building to collapse on him. Ethan, hidden in the darkness of the stairwell, realized the message had landed. The fear in Vance's voice was the sound of the weak voice, finally amplified. Vance walked down the hall to the maintenance closet, unlocked it, and pulled out a battered toolbox. He didn't look like a property manager. He looked like a man trying to defuse a bomb. He stopped in front of Ethan's grandmother's door. He didn't knock. He took a small key from his pocket, opened the exterior mail slot, and pushed an envelope through. Then he turned and went into Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, slamming the door shut. Ethan waited 5 minutes, then crept out. He went to his door and picked up the envelope. It was white, heavy stock, addressed simply to Resident 4C. Inside there was a single sheet of paper, printed neatly. It didn't mention the leak, the heat, or the $50 fee. It was just a short statement dated this morning. Dear Resident, please accept our sincere apologies for the recent administrative confusion regarding your rental payments. We have corrected the error. Your account is current and in good standing. Furthermore, as a gesture of goodwill, due to ongoing minor maintenance issues, a credit equivalent to 1 month's rent has been applied to your ledger, effective immediately. Meridian Holdings, no signature, no name, just the corporate letterhead, lying smoothly. Ethan folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He walked to the window at the end of the hallway, the one with the cracked pane, and looked down at the street. The sun was pale and cold, but the air felt different. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the free month of rent. It was the proof, the pain, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of being forgotten. That was the pressure. And he had found the exact tiny structural weakness necessary to turn that pressure into a specific, targeted blast. He hadn't fought Kyle Jennings with his fists. He fought Kenneth R. Vance with a piece of paper and a calculated risk. The real move wasn't running away. It was delivering the mail. Now, he needed to know why Vance was suddenly terrified of liability, terrified enough to personally clean up the mess. That required more information, and he had a hunch exactly where to find it. He walked back toward his apartment, his steps louder, more confident than before. He opened the laptop. He had already found Vance's home address from the public records connected to the truck registration. He was going to need better tools than Google. He needed to know what was in that crumpled letter he had shoved into the truck door. He needed to know what he had threatened Vance with. He typed in a new search, Dayton Public Records Request System. This was going to take longer than 3 days, but the cold, weak feeling in his chest was gone. It had been replaced by a slow, humming certainty. He was done drawing imaginary cities. It was time to start documenting the real one. He didn't go back to school that morning. The feeling of the paper in his pocket, the corporate surrender, the sudden, unbelievable gift of a month's rent was too hot to ignore. It felt like walking around with a stolen diamond. He went straight back to the apartment, pulling the stiff, worn laptop onto his knees. The fan whined immediately, a high-pitched protest against being woken up again. He knew what he had done. He had taken the most boring, useless thing in the world, a list of broken pipes, and put it where a guy who valued his own comfort above everything else couldn't ignore it. But why did it work so fast? Vance didn't look like a humanitarian. Vance looked like he smelled fear, and he was absolutely terrified. Ethan needed to know the specific architecture of that fear. He hammered away at the keys, tracking back through the digital maze. He wasn't looking for Facebook now. He was looking for the documents Vance had signed. The Dayton Public Records Request System was a digital graveyard designed to confuse the living. Forms that timed out, PDFs that wouldn't open, search fields that required specific permit numbers he didn't have. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of the Carver Street hallway designed to frustrate and isolate. He spent 4 hours straight fighting the system, his neck aching, the cold seeping up from the floorboards. He finally found the zoning board minutes from 2 years ago, the ones that first mentioned Kenneth R. Vance. They were dense. 50 pages of droning municipal language about setbacks, easements, and property classifications. Ethan didn't understand half of it, but he understood the context. Meridian Holdings wanted a fat tax reduction. The condition for the reduction was straightforward. Prove you're investing in the community. Prove the building is being brought up to modern standards. Vance's signature was on Exhibit D, the Affidavit of Structural Renovation. Ethan zoomed in on the scanned signature, K.R. Vance, looping, confident penmanship. The affidavit stated that Meridian Holdings had completed major upgrades, including replacing the obsolete internal water delivery and waste systems, and addressing all latent structural concerns identified during the pre-renovation survey. Ethan laughed, a dry, rasping sound that startled him. Latent structural concerns? The ceiling above his grandmother's stove leaked a gallon of water every night. The water heater hadn't been replaced. It had been jury-rigged so many times it looked like a robot assembled by a drunk mechanic. Vance hadn't renovated the building. Vance had certified that the building was safe and modern while it was actively falling apart. He spent the rest of the day cross-referencing the timeline. The affidavit was signed in July 2021. The tax abatement was granted in January 2022. The key was the pre-renovation survey. Plus, buildings built in the late 70s often contained materials like certain types of pipe insulation or fireproofing that were later identified as hazards or simply illegal under current Ohio code. To get a tax abatement based on structural improvement, they would have had to prove they removed the obsolete materials. Ethan typed in Dayton Building Code 1978, Carver Street. He found it. A massive, confusing document, but one section jumped out, screaming in bureaucratic capital letters. Mandatory plumbing replacement cycle. The steel pipes used in the Carver Street design had a mandatory replacement cycle of 40 years maximum due to specific corrosion rates. The building was 45 years old. The replacement was overdue. More critically, if the pipes were not replaced, the pressure buildup could lead to catastrophic failure, specifically concerning the main vertical waste stack. And that brought him back to Mrs. Rodriguez's broken radiator and the communal washing machine drain fee. The washing machine drain fee wasn't about negligence, it was about a corroded waste stack that couldn't handle the normal pressure of a standard washing cycle. It wasn't the tenants breaking the plumbing, it was the plumbing breaking itself. Vance had certified that the systems were new and modern. If the city found out, Vance wasn't just facing a tax penalty. He was facing charges for filing a fraudulent safety document related to a building that was, by code, ticking toward failure. This was the structural weakness. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He hadn't needed a bridge or a tower. He had needed a piece of bad pipe and a bureaucratic lie. He pulled out the original note he had slipped into the truck door. He hadn't kept a copy, but he remembered the wording exactly. He hadn't threatened to call the zoning board. That was too vague. He had written 1. Carver Street Apartments, 4712S, Carver St. Dayton, OH. Property ID 99312. 2. Structural integrity questionable. See mandatory replacement cycle, City Code 34.bt. 3. Observation. Current property manager certifying adherence to 2021 Affidavit of Structural Renovation, Exhibit D. Despite visible, documented failures in water delivery and waste management systems, see 4C and 4B. 4. Action. Documentation of these failures, including photographic evidence, will be anonymously submitted to the OH State Engineering Review Board, citing failure to comply with certification requirements. He hadn't threatened Vance the man. He had threatened Vance the signatory. He hadn't threatened exposure. He had threatened the activation of an audit protocol that would prove Vance had committed fraud that exposed hundreds of low-income tenants to a dangerous structural failure. Vance wasn't worried about the press or the tenants. He was worried about the State Engineering Review Board, which had the power to strip him of his professional license and expose Meridian Holdings to massive, multi-million-dollar liability lawsuits, potentially including criminal negligence if the structure failed. The fear was cold, hard, and professional. Ethan knew the free month's rent was a cheap bribe. Vance was trying to make the liability disappear, not the problem. The small fixes, the primer, the mention of a new water heater, were meant to look like good faith to any potential external observer, should the letter somehow surface. But Ethan didn't want good faith. He wanted a fundamental change. He wanted the building to be safe, warm, and dry. He couldn't rely on Vance's panic. Vance would fix the immediate threat, 4C and 4B, then go back to ignoring the other 80-some units. Ethan needed more than one piece of paper. He needed a folder, a file, a full case against the entire structure of negligence. He decided on the next move, scaling up. He needed proof of the widespread failures. He needed the collective voice of the forgotten. The difficult part was talking to people. Ethan was the kid who stared at the floor. He hadn't spoken more than 3 sentences to his neighbors in the 4 years he'd lived there. He started with Mrs. Rodriguez in 4B, the one who was running her oven for heat. He waited until Tuesday evening when his grandmother was at work. He knocked lightly on 4B. Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman whose face was a map of worry, opened the door cautiously. The air in her apartment was thick and smelled of gas from the stove. "Yes, honey?" she asked in Spanish, switching quickly to heavily accented English. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Ethan from next door," he said, his weak voice now carrying a strange, new edge of purpose. "I saw Mr. Vance here yesterday, about the radiator." She frowned. "He said they fix it soon. Today was soon. Now it is evening." "I know," Ethan said. He glanced over her shoulder. He saw a complex arrangement of buckets under a discolored patch of ceiling near her kitchen sink. "Is that the leak from the 5th floor?" She sighed, defeated. "Since Christmas, they tell me, just a drip, put bucket." I put bucket. Now I have 6 buckets. Ethan pulled out the clean notepad and pencil. He didn't ask her for a statement. He just started writing down the facts. 4B, Mrs. Rodriguez. Radiator broken, since Nov. Ceiling leak, since deck. 6 buckets. He didn't look at her. He looked at the paper. "They charged my grandmother $50 for the drain," Ethan said softly, still writing. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. $50? "They charged me $75, said my children put toy down the sink." Ethan wrote, 4B charged $75 for drain, false claim. "I believe they lied about fixing the building 2 years ago," Ethan stated, looking up for the first time. "I think the whole plumbing system is failing, and they know it." Mrs. Rodriguez stared at him, not with suspicion, but dawning comprehension. This wasn't the quiet boy. This was a small, intense messenger carrying dangerous information. "The water, it goes cold every night, at 6, she offered, lowering her voice. "Sometimes brown." Ethan wrote that down too. He didn't ask her to sign anything. He just documented the damage and the cost. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez." He moved to 3A, the corner unit, where an older veteran named Mr. Silas lived. Mr. Silas always smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and disappointment. Mr. Silas didn't want to open the door. Ethan spoke through the wood. "Mr. Silas, I know they gave 4C a free month's rent. I know why. It's because the building is illegal." Silence. Then the lock turned. Mr. Silas looked rough. "What the hell are you talking about, kid?" "Your window frame," Ethan said, pointing. The window was visibly warped, letting in a constant draft. They were supposed to replace the exterior frames 2 years ago. They said they did. They lied. Mr. Silas looked at the window, then back at Ethan, slowly processing the concept that this child knew more about his lease agreement than he did. "The wind comes in every goddamn night. I put plastic up. They charge us heat that goes straight out the glass," Mr. Silas grumbled. Ethan wrote, 3A, Mr. Silas, warped window frame, 2 years, excessive heating costs. He spent the next 2 weeks becoming the building's accidental archivist. He went to every floor, every unit he could access. He used his invisibility not to hide, but to observe and then to document. He didn't promise help. He didn't ask them to fight. He simply gathered the empirical data of their suffering. The building became a case file in his notebook. The fragile, damaged spine of the book was now wrapped in multiple layers of tape, holding together the clean pages of documented misery, alongside the complex theoretical bridges. The ugly reality was literally glued to the beautiful escape. He found out that the elevator in the West Wing had been condemned 5 years ago, but was still being used by the fifth-floor tenants who couldn't handle the stairs. He found out about the rampant mold in the first-floor laundry room, which Meridian Holdings had painted over 3 times without remediation. The facts piled up. 96 units, 81 documented, verifiable code violations or explicit breaches of the 2021 affidavit. Kyle Jennings tried to corner him again behind the gym. "Hey, Miller, where you been? You look busy, like a little rat collecting crumbs." Ethan looked at Kyle. He didn't feel the familiar sting of fear or shame. He felt nothing. Kyle was just noise. Kyle was a symptom, not the disease. Vance was the disease. Meridian Holdings was the system that enabled it. "I'm working on something," Ethan said, his voice flat. Kyle was startled by the direct eye contact. He usually got silence or desperate pleading. "Working on what? Your stupid drawings?" Kyle sneered, reaching out a hand. Ethan sidestepped the hand. "Something structural, something you wouldn't understand." He walked away, leaving Kyle standing there, confused by the sudden, quiet confidence. Ethan realized that the threat of physical harm held no power over him anymore. He was playing a different game, one where size and volume didn't matter. His grandmother noticed the change. He was eating better. She was getting the free rent credit, so food was suddenly less of a zero-sum game. But he was also preoccupied. "Ethan, you're always on that old machine," she worried one evening, watching him hunched over the keyboard. "Is this history project taking up all your time?" "It's a very complicated project, Grandma," he said, scrolling through a PDF showing the original construction blueprints of Carver Street. He was tracing the corroded waste stacks. "It's about how architecture affects populations." "Well, you just make sure you get some sleep," she said tiredly. He knew he couldn't tell her. The weight of this information, that their home was essentially a lie, a structural time bomb built on corporate fraud, would crush her. She needed the certainty of the free rent, not the truth of the danger. He had to move quickly. Vance had bought himself time. Ethan had used that time to build the ultimate lever. He needed to deliver the second message, and this time it couldn't be a vague threat. It had to be undeniable proof delivered to the one place that Vance couldn't bribe or intimidate, the official state body responsible for structural integrity. The State Engineering Review Board was based 80 miles away in Columbus. They had an online complaint system, but it was set up to filter out individual tenant grievances. It required technical language, permit numbers, and evidence of fraud, the exact things Ethan had spent 2 weeks meticulously gathering. He prepared the final package. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a file named Carver Structural Audit Complaint 2023. Inside the compressed file, 1. The 2021 Affidavit of Structural Renovation, signed by Vance, Exhibit D. 2. The relevant city code sections 34B high on mandatory pipe replacement. 3. 81 individual incident reports, the compiled lists from the tenants. Each report included the unit number, the specific failure, mold, heat loss, leaks, and the date of the tenant's last unsuccessful maintenance request. 4. Photographic evidence, taken with his grandmother's old cell phone camera, of the leaks, the painted-over mold, and the warped window frames cross-referenced to the unit numbers. The final piece of paper he prepared was a cover letter. Unlike the first note, which was quick and dirty, this one was formal, cold, and devastating. He wrote it in the persona of an internal whistleblower, someone with access to the Meridian Holdings internal documents, not a worried child. Saturday morning, he walked to the main public library downtown. It was warm, quiet, and had fast internet, a perfect contrast to the cold, loud chaos of Carver Street. He sat at a public terminal. He opened the State Engineering Review Board website. He uploaded the compressed file. It took 7 minutes. The upload bar moved agonizingly slow. He could feel his heart hammering in his throat, louder than the old laptop fan. This was it, the point of no return. When the upload was complete, the system generated a confirmation number, Serb Comp Day 378. He took a photograph of the screen with his phone, storing the confirmation number. Then, he went to the second stage of his plan. He opened a secure, encrypted email account he had created. He wrote an email to Kenneth R. Vance using the email address he'd found on the zoning board documents. The subject line was simple: Serb Comp Day 03978. The body of the email contained only 3 sentences. Mr. Vance. The documented structural failures and fraudulent certifications concerning the Carver Street apartments were submitted to the State Engineering Review Board today. You have 48 hours to resolve the systemic issues. This is not a request for a free month's rent. He signed it, the resident archivist. He hit send. He shut down the computer, retrieved his backpack, and walked out into the cold Dayton sunlight. He felt oddly hollow. He had just detonated an enormous bomb, and now he had to wait for the shockwave. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe Vance would ignore it. Maybe he would hire lawyers to track down the resident archivist. Maybe the state bureaucracy would swallow the complaint whole and spit it back out. But he had done the only thing he could do. He had taken his weak voice, wrapped it in facts, and sent it directly to the people who had the power to make Vance afraid of something much bigger than an angry grandmother. The difference between the first note and the email was scale. The first was a warning shot aimed at Vance's personal life. This was a declaration of war aimed at Meridian Holdings' bottom line, using Vance's signature as the target lock. He walked home, past the same cracked sidewalks, smelling the same coal dust. But he saw the building differently. It wasn't just a place where he lived. It was a ticking clock, and he was holding the wrench. He knew that the real fight, the one that would determine if his weak voice could actually force a change in the physical world, was about to begin. Vance had 48 hours before the review board officially started their process. 48 hours for the panic to set in. He just had to wait for the phone to ring, or more accurately, the sudden violent arrival of someone from Meridian Holdings at Carver Street. He knew Vance wouldn't be coming alone this time. The stakes were too high. The silence that followed the email felt heavier than any noise. Ethan sat on the pull-out couch, the confirmation number seared into his memory, waiting for the sound of tires screeching onto Carver Street. He didn't draw that night. He watched the clock. The waiting was the hardest part of the architecture of damage. He was ready for the consequence. The silence was heavier than the old water heater. Saturday night passed, then Sunday. Ethan sat by the window, the cracked pane providing a view of nothing interesting, just the chain-link fence separating the building from the abandoned dry cleaner. He didn't sleep much. Every car that slowed down on Carver Street made his muscles tense. He kept reviewing the folder in his head. Serb Comp Day 3978. That number was the only real protection they had. If Vance tried to retaliate personally, that number became a trigger. Sunday evening, the temperature in the apartment dropped sharply. He heard Mrs. Rodriguez's oven kick on down the hall. Vance hadn't fixed the radiator. He had only delayed the inevitable. At 7 a.m. Monday, just as the sun was a weak smear of orange over the horizon, a vehicle arrived. It wasn't the gleaming black truck. This was a dark gray SUV, brand new, the kind that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. 2 men got out. They wore suits that looked tailored, not just purchased. They didn't look stressed like Vance. They looked surgical. One, tall with thinning hair, carried a sleek black briefcase. The other, younger and built like a linebacker, stood slightly behind him, scanning the building. They walked straight past the main entrance, which was mostly obscured by the overflowing dumpster, and paused in front of the list of mailboxes. They didn't check 4C. They didn't check 4B. They were looking at the entire building as a liability assessment. They went inside. Ethan was already in the stairwell, positioned near the 4th floor landing, where he could hear everything without being seen. The tall man who introduced himself downstairs as Mr. Thorne, representing Meridian Holdings corporate assets, didn't knock on 4B or 4C first. He started on the 1st floor, knocking methodically. Ethan heard the murmur of conversations, but the key exchange happened 10 minutes later, when Thorne reached the 3rd floor and knocked on Mr. Silas's door, 3A, the warped window. Mr. Silas opened it, grumbling. "Mr. Silas, I'm Thorne. I understand you have some concerns regarding the structural integrity of your unit." Thorne's voice was smooth, trained to sound empathetic while being utterly ruthless. "Concerns? The goddamn wind blows right through the wall," Silas spat. "And that little kid, Miller," he said. Thorne cut him off, quick and sharp. "Yes, we are aware of the documentation being circulated. We apologize profusely for the failures of our local management. In fact, Mr. Silas, we are here to announce a complete, non-negotiable resolution." He paused for effect. Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't a bribe. This was a solution designed to make the CERB complaint disappear entirely. "Effective immediately," Thorne continued, his voice echoing slightly in the bare hallway, "Meridian Holdings has decided, in light of the extensive, undocumented maintenance failures, to offer all residents of Carver Street Apartments a relocation package." Silence. Ethan held his breath. "What kind of relocation?" Silas asked, suspicious. "A substantial one," Thorne said, the briefcase clicking open. "We have purchased a property complex 10 miles north of here, the new Woodhaven Crossings. Brand new construction, full amenities, central air, paid utilities for the first 6 months. We will cover all moving costs, and we will waive all accumulated back rent. You move next week, or whenever you are ready. Your current lease is voided, effective upon relocation." The offer was too generous. It wasn't charity. It was panic. "And if we don't want to move?" Silas challenged. "That is, unfortunately, not an option," Thorne replied, the smoothness disappearing, replaced by a granite hardness. "The full structural audit initiated by our internal review board, which, again, was triggered by your accurate documentation, has determined that the building must be vacated, pending full remediation, or, more likely, demolition. This building is no longer habitable under current safety codes. We regret the inconvenience, but your safety is paramount." He was lying. The CERB audit hadn't even started, but Thorne was using the threat of the audit to justify the evacuation. He was turning Ethan's structural threat into a corporate necessity. They weren't fighting the liability. They were liquidating it. Ethan crept back to the 4th floor and watched through the peephole as Thorne and his bodyguard reached 4C. Thorne didn't knock. He simply slid a thick envelope under the door. Ethan waited until they moved on to 4B, where Thorne was talking to a shell-shocked Mrs. Rodriguez. He opened the door and retrieved the envelope. Inside, there was a copy of the relocation offer, identical to Silas's. But there was also a second document, a highly formal notarized waiver, stating that in exchange for the full relocation package, the tenant agreed to release Meridian Holdings from all liability, known or unknown, past, present, and future, relating to the Carver Street property. It was a massive, expensive cleanup operation designed to bury the CERB complaint under a mountain of signed waivers. If 90% of the tenants signed the release, the state would have no victims to interview, and the case against Vance and Meridian Holdings would crumble into a simple, resolved maintenance dispute. Ethan went to the living room. His grandmother was just waking up. She looked at the envelope in his hand, confused. "What is that, honey?" she asked. "It's the solution, Grandma," Ethan said, his voice flat. He showed her the relocation offer, the brand new apartment, the free utilities. Her eyes welled up immediately. "Oh, Ethan, thank God. We're finally getting out of this cold box." He knew she would sign the waiver without reading the fine print. She saw hope. Ethan saw the structure of corruption dissolving, not because of kindness, but because of exposure. He couldn't stop them from moving. The building was genuinely dangerous, but he couldn't let the CERB complaint be wiped out. Vance needed to face the fraud charges, otherwise he would just move on and sign another building's death warrant. Ethan looked at the relocation waiver. Release Meridian Holdings from all liability. He knew his next move. The weak voice had achieved structural damage. Now it needed to achieve justice. He pulled out the old laptop, the fan screaming in protest. He went to the secure email account. He composed an email addressed to the State Engineering Review Board, using the CERB case number he'd memorized. He attached a scanned copy of the corporate relocation waiver and Thorne's official offer letter. The subject line was clear. Update. Carver Street Audit Complaint SerbComp Day 03978. Corporate attempt to subvert investigation. The body contained only 2 lines. Meridian Holdings is attempting to force residents into signing comprehensive liability waivers in exchange for relocation to preempt the findings of your investigation. We advise immediate inspection of the building and subpoena of Kenneth R. Vance's financial and professional records before waivers are signed. He hit send. He didn't sign it. Resident archivist this time. He signed it. Documentation source. He shut the laptop, the screen going black. He looked at the white envelope on the table, the key to a new life wrapped in a legal lie. He picked up his coat. He had 30 minutes before school started, and he needed to find the one person who could stop the tenants from signing away their leverage. He had to get to Mr. Silas before Mr. Thorne did. He had to tell them, take the new apartment, take the free rent, take the moving costs, but do not sign the waiver. Not yet. He needed to teach the forgotten how to leverage their own misery. He bolted the door, leaving the laptop on the couch, the corporate waiver lying next to it. The clock was ticking. He had made the biggest structural move of his life, and now the real work of damage control began. He ran down the stairs, not toward school, but toward the 3rd floor. Go, now.